Welcome to the First Gen American podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Toporek, and I'm a first-generation American. My dad was born in Siberia in 1942 and my mom in Turkey in 1943. I used to be ashamed and embarrassed that my family was different. We spoke different languages. We ate different foods. We were working class in an affluent area of Long Island, New York. In my 20s, through my awakening and journey of self-exploration, I realized how appreciative I needed to be given the sacrifice my parents made to give their children better opportunity. I realized that being first-generation American was more of a superpower than something to be ashamed of. Since then, I celebrated my background, harnessed these values into who I am today, embodying all these qualities into everything I do. In each episode, I'll be interviewing first-generation Americans, helping them tell their stories. I hope you enjoy the show. Please subscribe and like the show, and feel free to send comments or even interviewee suggestions. Thanks for listening. Mr. Jones.
Hello.
Welcome to the First Gen American podcast.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's been a long time you and I have been chatting about doing this, so I'm glad we got to make it happen live and in person.
I'm proud of you for doing it.
We'll see. Why don't you start out with giving us a background of your family's history?
Sure. So my father is Hungarian. He was born in 1933 in Budapest. His mother was from a Jewish family. His father was Hungarian, I believe, Catholic family. So he was being born in 33 in Hungary during that time. It was
Glorious.
not the best time to be part Jewish at the times. He grew up there, and then he fled in 56 when he was 23.
So he made it through, and did anyone know he was Jewish, or did he default to, I'm half Jewish, so...
See, that's the part I don't know.
Okay.
What is interesting is that there's only one family photograph of my grandparents from that side, and in the picture, both of them have crosses on. And so my entire life, I never knew until he passed away. And that's when I found out about the whole background of it.
Right. So when you and I talked a couple of years ago, you were describing that you just had found that stuff out. And so you knew your father was Hungarian and not American, but you had no idea about the whole Jewish ancestry given the time that he was.
No idea.
Never one time growing up did you ever know?
No.
And so how did you find out?
So when he passed away, started going through the little documents that I could find that we were never really ever allowed to go into. So it was kind of a free for all at that point. And we were digging through. It was myself and my sister. And
how old were you?
33 or 34.
Oh, okay.
And she found some documents, and some of the last names started to pop up that she found. It sound Catholic to you? Like Edelstein, like this? And I was like, what? She's like, and my sister was like, I know it. And I was like, something's off. It was weird. So I did hire a genealogist in Hungary over the internet during COVID.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in 2020. And I said, look, I know about, well, not really. I said, I know about his father, not much, but I don't really know about any of them. I don't know where my grandparents are buried. I have no clue. I have no idea about any of his family. I never met one single person on his family, ever.
And
still haven't.
He was the only one that came to the United States in the 50s?
He was the only one.
So he came from Hungary. So he stayed in Hungary the whole time?
He stayed until the Hungarian Revolution. He was in 56, which would have put him in college or just outside of college. I did find out.
So he makes it through the Holocaust, but leaves when the revolution happened.
He did. And he initially went to Austria, where most people went that had to leave. And then he went to Canada because Canada took a large amount of Hungarian refugees.
So he was listed as a Hungarian refugee, not a Jewish refugee.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there was no affiliation with being Jewish anywhere. So you hire the genealogist.
Hired the genealogist. He comes back to me after like a month and he's like, well, we found a bunch of information and, there's probably a reason why you've never heard or met anyone. But, your father's aunt, father's uncle, cousin, they all died in 1944 in Auschwitz from his mother's side.
Today happens to be the 80th anniversary.
Yeah. So it's a strange thing to think about that you're that close to that.
Yeah.
Like I'm not very far removed. My father wasn't very far removed from growing up there, during the Nazi occupation and then the Soviet occupation until he finally just fled. And I believe he just left his parents there.
So you never met his...
Never did.
Never.
No.
Nobody on that side of the family.
No.
So he comes here around college age to Canada.
Yes, as an engineer. And from what I read, the Canadians did take on a lot of higher educated refugees at that time into Canada in the 1950s. And he worked in his field as an engineer in Canada for a few years. He completely changed his name to knock off any reference of being Hungarian.
European.
Or being European. And he was there until, I believe, the 60s, mid-60s, until he went to California. And then he lived in the LA region in California as an engineer and got his citizenship, U.S. citizenship in 1968, I believe.
And where and when did he meet your mom?
I met my mom in the late 1970s in LA.
Oh, really? Well, that's why you like palm trees.
Yeah, and so it's funny because it's a true mix. My mother is born in the South, English, Scottish heritage, early settlers of the United States type of thing, came back way back when, that traces from like the farmers and then would come down and settle into the South. So, she comes from that Southern and he comes from this European, very, very different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think attracted them? I mean, because that's two worlds that are totally different.
I still haven't figured that out. And if you ask my mother, I don't think she's figured it out going to this day. But my father was different. He was he was a little bit of a character.
I mean, if you're an engineer, you're educated, you're smart, you're hardworking.
Yeah. But he was very, very quiet about his past point.
Did you ever ask him?
We did. We would ask, from time to time, and he would give you little bits and pieces, but, he would get agitated if you poke too much about it.
Mm.
The thing he hated the most in the world, and I would cringe as I got older and people would ask him, but they would ask him, oh, where are you from?
Because they know his
because we had
an accent.
Yeah, and I never knew. I didn't realize he had an accent until I got older.
Really?
Yeah, because you grow up in it. So when you're in the house,
so like your friends never asked?
Later, they did. As I got older, my friends would ask, like
in middle school.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like, where's your dad from? Like, he's different. Like,
and you're like, what? What do you mean?
Yeah, I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, he has an accent, and so people would ask him, where are you from? He would get, and he's like, what do you mean? American. I'm from California. And they're like, okay, but your accent. And he's like, what accent? And he'd get really, really agitated.
It's a very familiar story with my parents.
Yeah, he would get agitated.
So they from California, they ended up going where?
From California, they went to Texas, and I was born in Texas. And we were in Texas till I was probably about 3, 4. And then we moved just outside of DC into Northern Virginia. And then I grew up in Northern Virginia till I was about 15, 16.
Okay, so that's where like your formative
Yeah,
years
was outside
growing.
of DC.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
yeah. And then we relocated to South Florida. I was like a junior in high school.
Oh, it's amazing
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So what caused all the moves? Was it just work for your dad?
Yeah, worked for
So
my
he
dad.
was working for, I guess, defense
Well,
contractors.
yeah, he moved away from being kind of a trade engineer. He actually, in LA, he worked on office buildings and he worked on office building build outs. And then he actually has, which I found, which is so bizarre given he has a patent that he created for the first underfloor. I can't say it's the first one, but got a patent for it, as I have the document, for creating an underfloor cabling system for tenant build outs.
So it's basically raised flooring.
Exactly.
Is what's used.
Yeah, he has one of like a patent for that, and he created these blocks with these channels so that he could run cabling like raised floor systems.
So he was an electrical contractor then.
He was an electrical engineer. Yeah. And then later on he got more into the developing, and so he got into some development of office buildings and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your upbringing. You brought up that like around middle school you started to realize that your family was different than other families.
Yeah, I think that's true. Mostly from my father's side. My mother's side,
yeah, she's American.
But my father was definitely culturally different, I would say. You know, he was not a sports guy or.
You ever have a catch with your father?
Never.
Never. Me neither.
No, he wasn't like that. He was.
Didn't know how to play the game.
Didn't know how to play the game. No, he barely. I don't think he knew most of the rules for any of the professional sports. That was not. He was a serious individual. It was never.
What did he do for fun?
He was big into aviation. So
okay.
He had a pilot's license. He was all about aviation. He needed to have this constant.
Was he a big reader?
He would read. He would study.
Sounds exactly like my dad. My dad never went to high school and could sit and read textbooks.
Yeah.
He was actually also an electrical engineer.
Yeah, that's very similar. He would get like medical encyclopedias when he was bored and read those. Like,
I think part of it is like they didn't get to have like a normal education, and they like education was sort of like the way up and out. Like if you were educated, you could make your way.
I think that's right. I never thought of it like that, but I think that's accurate because he always used to tell me, you need a trade. Just beat that in. He's like, doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Me too.
Got to be a trade. You can always work. You can always, and I think that's right. He saw it as his way out or as a safety net or something like that.
So we didn't grow up with, we were middle class in sort of an affluent area growing up, but my parents basically did that so that we would be in a really good school district in New York. And what they always said to us was, we'll pay for whatever education you want. Like to this day, if I actually said I wanted to go to law school,
yeah,
they would pay for it. That's how important education was to them. And, I think they value it so much because they didn't get to have it. Like my mom couldn't even go to middle school.
No,
you had to pay for it.
Wow.
And so when I think you are in a country where you have access to all this information and you could read whatever you want, right? The freedom, like we don't even think about that. I probably had never thought about it till we're having this conversation. But we have the freedom to read whatever we want. There is no restriction on what it is that we can read.
Yeah.
And they came from a place where everything was restricted.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything he was taught or had to read was under occupation of some sort.
Yeah.
He was under communism, under Nazism, until he was 23 something years old. And so, yeah, in a way, like that freedom for him was just like,
Yeah.
learn, take, read,
Insatiable.
like, I want to do this, I want to do that. Like, that's what he did. He just did not, like, leisure time for him was not sports or anything like that.
So how did that translate for you when you're growing up in that kind of environment? Like, did they pound you on academics and, all that stuff? Like you have to do well because there's no safety net or anything like that? Or,
They did and they didn't. My father was always busy running, doing stuff. My mother was very involved in it, but, they didn't beat you over the head that you had to be an A plus student. You had to show up, you had to, you know, do your best and whatever. And so, but they didn't hammer that over your head. My father was, you know, he wanted you to be better at math, and he kind of was really just trying to search for a trade type of education.
so how did that impact you going through high school and college?
Yeah, I think that it was kind of always I kind of picked up at some point as we got older because my father was in the real estate business. It ebbed and flowed, and you had good years and bad years and things like that. There wasn't this stability. I think that was a function of his background. He could handle large amounts of stress. Yeah, but
I understand that.
yeah, he could handle large amounts. Maybe he could, maybe he couldn't, but he did. So I kind of picked up on there was no safety net,
Right.
For you, me, and you had to kind of make your way.
So what did that mean in terms of college and, where your path took you from that point? When did you start to really figure that out?
I think I started working as soon as I legally could, which I think at that time you could be 15 or 16 and they allowed you to work a certain amount of time.
Working papers.
Yeah. And so as soon as I could, I did. I ran out to the mall and got a job,
What was your
after
first job?
school. I was in a clothing store in the mall. I mean, I did odd jobs before that because it's kind of the stuff that my dad would have me do. He would never call anyone to fix anything. Never.
My dad was the neighborhood fixer.
He had to fix everything himself. It didn't matter if it was the air conditioning. It didn't matter if it was the refrigerator, a microwave, the light bulb, the car.
The crazy thing is that there was no YouTube videos to help you through.
I know.
Now I could probably
I know.
But back then, I don't know how they figured that stuff out.
I don't either. I really don't.
And what was your role in him fixing it? You
Helper.
And what was entailed in helping?
Holding the flashlight, bringing the tools, climbing a ladder to go get something. Or if there was something where it was small and you had to like get in it, like he would just shove me in there and go get in there, and he'd be pulling on my feet to try to bring me back. And that was the weekend. And I was like, dude, could we go to a football game? Like all my other friends.
Can I just go ride my bike?
Right. But like friends are going to these stadiums and concerts and baseball game and all that. And he would just look at me like cross-eyed. Like,
yeah,
we just didn't do that.
I tell people all the time, what
I
learned from my dad when it came to fixing things was the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And, back then I couldn't say I was actually learning anything.
I don't think I did either.
But I think I did, in the sense that now, like, I'm kind of like, I'm always fixing stuff. I'm always doing stuff.
Actually, the thing that I learned that I didn't realize so much later on was the idea of troubleshooting, where there was this, I'm going to try this. If it doesn't work, then I'm going to be the patience to go through the troubleshooting steps is actually what I learned. Where like you don't always just get the answer the first time. It takes a few times to kind of go through it and figure it out. Which, for what we do is a very,
I think that's
very skill.
Right. I mean, he would spend like all weekend like trying to fix this one thing, and he would lock on to that, and he had no idea what he was doing, but he'd figure it out if it took him 2 days or 2 hours.
You may have been without air conditioning
that's
for
right.
a period of time, but
he would not, it would have to be bad for him to like call somebody. Yeah. And usually usually my mother would have to step in and say, this is ridiculous. Like, the kids have to go to school or something like that.
Yeah. So what were some of the things that, like, were you ever embarrassed that you were from a different family? Like, how did that work?
I think obviously by the time I was in like later elementary and into middle school and things like that, like, having kids over, or, if you had to go to a birthday party or something like that, like my mother would take me. It was never my father. And then, a little bit older, the kids would come over to my house. Like, it was all,
Did they come to your house?
yes. Yeah. Some, friends. And then I look back, like, but some of my earliest friends were immigrants. I was kind of drawn to, like, my best friend growing up. He was Indian, and, we got along great. And it wasn't awkward with him and us because it was, people were different. But I didn't necessarily have, you know, so it was a little bit, everyone knew,
Yeah.
even going into like college, like you'd come home and have a friend like come back from college, be like, look, my dad's.
I used to just say he was born in Siberia.
Yeah, they would love it. They'd love it.
That's all they needed to know.
Yeah, they would love him, but
They would love him because he was different, and it was like a novelty for them.
That's right.
But they didn't have to be brought up by him.
Right.
Which are two very different things.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So there's that.
So how do you think, like, when did you come to appreciate the fact that you grew up in a different household? Because one of the things that I realized, like, it didn't hit me until I got out of college, where I realized, wait a minute, I can't be embarrassed by this. This is a freaking superpower. Like, I have this heritage that learned to survive. And, like, even though I didn't go through it and it's slightly diluted down, I saw the pain of what they went through in their faces and their emotions and things like that, where I went from embarrassment to really trying to spend the rest of my life making up for the fact that I was embarrassed by it and embracing it, which is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast. Is the stories of the first generation Americans, I just don't know if that gets told, because everything that you're describing was my childhood.
Yeah. I couldn't pinpoint the exact point of it, but it definitely started to trickle in as I got older. Probably started to pick up a little bit towards the end of college, and then a little bit after college, probably by my late 20s. By my late 20s, I started to say, like, the persistence of this man it's ridiculous. Very persistent. He always acted like he never had a safety net, anything.
Yeah.
Good and bad.
So enjoying the moment and enjoying life at any particular time is hard for them, because they feel like they could lose it at any moment.
That's right.
It's interesting. When I interviewed my dad, we talked about fear. And I said to him, I literally feel like you have feared nothing. And he's like, well, when you have lost everything multiple times and it's taken away from you, ripped out of your hands, you never fear it again, because you know you could get knocked down and you're going to find your way back up, and it doesn't really matter. That blew me away.
Yeah. I picked up on that towards my late 20s, and he was just persistent, and he would act like he had nothing to lose ever. It was, and we would question sometimes, like, why are you, like, you're swinging for the fences, right? When probably, like, the smart thing to do would be, like, hit
for
a
the
double, right? But not you. You always have to swing big, always. And he never calibrated his risk factors to having family later, because I just think it was so just instilled in him that like, I've got to get out. Like, I've got to be something somewhere. And that's why if you asked him where he was from, he'd freak out, because he was in his mind American. This is, this is who I am.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did all that get instilled in you? Like, if he was swinging for the fences, didn't feel like he had a safety net, and he was a grinder.
Yeah.
How do you think that impacted you? Like, did you end up wanting to take less risk? Were you okay with risk, or like, how did you look at all that?
I think I had to take it and try to calibrate it, because too much of one thing is not that good. So having to take the good and dial back some of the riskier kind of, so in some way I'm definitely like risk averse, just from growing up, because you see someone swing for the fence and not hit it.
Yeah.
And that down that comes after it, right? There's a valley that comes through that. And not to get on like this whole psyche thing, but it's like up high and they swing for the fence and you don't get it that time, right? Out of like 10 times you hit that grand slam like once or twice. The other 8 times out of the 10, it's like, and so you would have to like
the agony of
you'd have to live through that agony of defeat with somebody. So, I tried to calibrate that later on, not to be as.
So have you ever faced any discrimination growing up with, like, did people make fun of you that you had like a different family, or were people generally accepting? I mean, it sounds like you sort of gravitated to having actually similar type friends that
Did. Yeah, I think I did, looking back on it.
and that just
Sure
made you
did.
more comfortable.
Maybe more comfortable. And there are other times where, frankly, my mother was the forward face, and that's kind of who I would draw the attention to.
Yeah, it's interesting that you had a split
Yeah.
American and foreign face, so you didn't have it fully dominated. Yeah, so it's interesting, like, if you walked into your house and your mom was cooking food, it's not like it was like Hungarian food.
No.
Right. It would be American
That's
food.
right.
So
Yeah.
you didn't have the full Monty of 2 immigrant parents where they were both different.
Yeah. And, you'd have to kind of work that through. Yeah. Because I'd be like, here's go to mom. And then out comes later. And I'm like, oh, here we go. This is going to be good.
Can you place like a specific moment where you realized how much your background really shaped kind of who you are today? And how do you balance like honoring your heritage and also being American?
So, I think if you point to a specific point in time, it's when you start to get, out into the world on your own. For some reason, I just never was afraid to just go. I just was like, you went, you just started walking, and like, it just, one thing my father, that I picked up from him and from my mother too, but is nothing ever intimidated him.
And tell me about that.
Like,
are there some stories that you have there?
I do, and they're not all good, but
mine are not. Some of them like are etched in my memory.
Yeah, like I probably definitely have some childhood trauma for some of these, because nothing would intimidate him, and if he got poked, he would be defensive.
It's interesting because he had no fear,
none,
and like when those situations would happen, I would fear that something would happen, and just not an ounce of fear. And he had like this pipe. I remember it was a black pipe. It was all electrical wire tied up around the pipe that he'd keep under his seat in the van. As someone messed with him, he would just take it out. He'd open the car door and he'd hold it out. And I'm like, Dad, what if they have a gun or a knife? And he's like, I'm not afraid to die. And he's like, if I show up to them that I am not afraid, that immediately makes them back down. I was like,
Yeah.
it's a good quality to have, but I'm not sure that's getting transferred down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to assume they have a gun.
Yeah. He wasn't physically, guy. It was more either verbal or like,
But my dad never fought. I mean,
it
always diffused.
Yeah. I mean, my dad was the same way. He never fought either. It's just, he would either, through speaking and, or, if he had to whip out some charm but like, just no, he just never was intimidated or showed any fear of anybody. So yeah, I think I had this kind of self-confidence. I don't know where it came from, to be honest, of just going. And I just would just knock on. I literally would just try things to see what I could do, but always assuming that I could do them.
So it's interesting. So one word that my dad would never allow us to use, I'm curious if it held true for you, was if you said the word I can't, it would infuriate him. Because he would just say there is no such thing as you can't.
Yeah.
Later on in life, I mean, similar to you, it started to click for me that, yeah, I could actually do whatever it is that I want. It's just a matter of setting my mind to it. And,
right.
Can I just figure it out? And even if it's hard, and that is a quality, like I still remember how many times he would like it'd be like the one thing, like, if you said that, like, then there's just no way you could say you can't.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think, we just didn't.
The survivalist mentality.
Yeah, it just wasn't even spoken like that in our house. Like, he just didn't, there was no such thing.
So that's what I was meaning when I realized, like, I think first generation Americans have this superpower. Like, that is the superpower. Right? Like, I can figure out anything, and no matter what happens, I'm going to find a way through it.
We used to say that about him sometimes because he would find ways to get things done that we'd be like, how are you doing? Like, what were you doing that? And it was a mix between just persistence and determination. I mean, looking back, he probably came from nothing. So it was important for him.
Worse than.
Well, yeah, it was worse than nothing. And, we never went home, or he never went back to Hungary until the fall of the Berlin Wall. And he never could go back. He said, I can't go back. When the wall came down, it's like 91-ish, 92-ish, we went.
Oh, interesting.
We went to Vienna. And then we drove from Vienna into Hungary. And we spent a couple days there. And that was the first time he had been back since he had left, I believe. Yeah, that was the last time he had been.
My dad's never been back to Russia.
Yeah.
I'll never go back.
Yeah. And it's funny because he didn't really I don't think he even wanted to go.
But he felt like he needed to see it.
Yeah. I don't even know what was the reason why he decided we needed
to go. But that's
good
that he took you.
But we went,
yeah,
and he showed me a couple places, and he showed me the bullet holes in the walls of buildings, and he explained to me why these were there, and he'd tell you this is where they lined up people.
Even at that point, never told you,
but never
Jewish and lost family.
Never. He would not. He took it to the grave. Very secretive and quiet about his upbringing.
He left stuff behind, but he didn't actually leave anything for you to tell you anything.
No. I mean, there's some little notes and scribbles that on pieces of paper that I have that are in Hungarian that I haven't been able to get translated. And there's some other things, but yeah, there was never this is what went down and this is why. Nope, nothing.
So it's interesting. You are half American and you ended up marrying someone who is not American.
Yeah.
And so do you think that had an influence where that was sort of a comfort thing for you? Now, she's obviously from South America and not Hungary,
Yeah.
but
I don't know if it had an influence on it one way, but I never even, like, the fact that I knew there was going to be a cultural kind of difference, like whatever, like it just never bothered me. In fact, we, embraced it, and, we have 2 kids, and I push to have them recognize all of their backgrounds, from my mother's side, from the South, and the history that they have, and then my wife's family from Brazil, and my father's side from Hungary, and the Jewish percentage, and everything. I try to teach them about all of
yeah.
it.
So tell me a little bit about the Jewish part of it now that you found that out so much later.
Yeah.
How have you explained that to your kids? Like, are they curious? How far have you taken it to sort of, because you weren't brought up Jewish at all, and it was
No.
a stunner to you that you were.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was such a stunner to me that I did one of the DNA things.
Oh yeah,
They test
23.
Yeah, whatever it was, Ancestry or whatever. I did that, and it came back, and I was like, well, yeah, well,
What percentage was it?
33.
Oh wow, that's a big number.
Yeah, it was predominantly. Yeah. So it's one that I'm not familiar with. So it's hard, but I try to teach the kids about that, and especially just about the history too of like some of their family members and things like that. And there's no one left. Father was the only one. And so, on that side of his family, his aunt, his uncle, cousins, they perished in 44. And so I try to explain to them, specifically about that part of the heritage, and to embrace it. I think
Yeah,
it's great.
I mean, it's part of who they are.
Yeah, I think it's great because
So I'm curious because your kids are actually now first generation American.
yeah.
So I'm interested if you see them understand that their household is different or not, or are they too young?
They're too young, but we're also in South Florida.
Yeah.
And so it's different than like when I grew up in Northern Virginia.
Right.
Right.
Because the heritage and the culture here
melting
is
pot, and there's a lot of immigration down here. So I think it's different.
Do they speak 2 languages?
They do. They speak Portuguese and English.
Wow.
They're Brazilian citizens, and we do everything that we can. And I want them to be proud
Advantage, yeah,
of all of their entire background, because that's what makes them Americans, is the mix of who they are.
It's interesting because with my kids, once the light bulb went off, I really tried to have them embrace, the religion is one thing where they can figure that out on their own, but the culture was the most important, and, the food and the traditions and things like that. And it's interesting how it's translated. My kids on many levels have surpassed things that I knew, and I have to go educate myself on like, oh, wait a minute, I don't actually know this stuff. I need to go figure it out.
Yeah,
but it's interesting that like you're passing down this same situation to your own kids, and once they leave South Florida, if they do, to go to college or whatever, it might actually dawn on them, wait a minute, I grew up in a different household, similar to how that dawned on you.
Yeah, I think it will. I think it for sure will when they get a little bit older.
All right, so we're going to go rapid fire. We can wrap it up.
Let's do it.
You ready? Favorite dish from your cultural background, if you have one?
Goulash.
Goulash. Actually like it.
Yeah, love it.
Fatty for me.
Love it.
Oh, wow.
Cucumber salad, goulash, chicken paprikash.
Did your dad actually ever make that stuff?
No, but we were in Europe one time, and he took me some places to go have it. And so it was a couple times that we kind of did that. It was cool.
All right. One tradition from your heritage that you've kept alive. It can be from your mom's side too.
I don't know if we
If
have.
you wear a kilt, that's fine.
No. Yeah, no. I don't think we ever had one. We did things just very traditional, like Christmas, Thanksgiving.
Yeah, your dad, it sounded like he wanted to have nothing to do
Nothing.
with it. He didn't embrace it.
No. No. Not only did he not embrace it, I think it was just a complete and utter, like almost like it didn't have, or a different life for him.
Yeah.
There was this block, and you just didn't go there.
It's funny because like my dad had his 3 and below that he doesn't remember, like the whole Russia thing. And then he was in Poland till he was 13. And then there was this 1-year gap, which I didn't find out until I interviewed him, where he was in Italy and holding before they can get to Israel. So he went to multiple countries. He ultimately had to learn 7 different languages in order to just survive by the age of 13.
Yeah. And I bitch because I sit in traffic for an hour and 20 minutes to get to work. It's really perspective when you hear, puts things in perspective.
Is there anything that you found of your dad's that like is, after he passed, is like really precious to you, that, stands out as like, wow, that's something I will always remember that was part of that for him? Like when you were going through the boxes and stuff.
The one thing that really caught me off guard, I think, found some old documents, and I found basically what I've determined to be like were his papers in Hungary. And when you open the books and it's written on there, the like watermark or the seal that's in there is it's the Soviet hammer and sickle that's like stamped into the book. And so when you see that and like, there's his picture and his name and like all the information, and then you see that like there with the Hungarian stuff in there, you're like, it's just that connection of like, oh wow, like you
lived through that
in that. And then when I had the genealogist go through and they found the records from like the books in Hungary or wherever he finds them, of his family members in the records, and like that has like the but it's like a death certificate or death log of like died July so and so 44 in Auschwitz. Those things I think stuck out for me like a lot more than there's little stuff that he had from work and stuff like that's cool, and some of his airplane stuff, all that's very cool. But I think that stuff where it's like, okay, this is what you felt, this is what you were dealing with, your life was completely different than mine. Right? Like I had no clue, and so to see, and I think for him that was like what he wanted to do, was get out of that.
He wanted to put it
away,
not
start over, and like his next generation like just don't know anything about them. They're just Americans. They're just here.
That's right.
And so that's what I think that was about. And
all right, so what is your piece of advice that you'd want to pass on to people that you learned from your parents?
I learned that I guess that the different backgrounds that you have is what kind of makes you, and it defines you in the sense that it makes you stronger than other people, and like being different and having this different cultural background and some type of survival and like it's just.
And you said it before, like you can figure anything out and you're not afraid to fail.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, and sometimes I fail epically.
You're going to get back up.
But it's just, to not try something, So I think that's it. It's just having that background, and that's what it is.
Persistence. All right, bud, this was fun.
Yeah,
this was awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the First Gen American podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. Feel free to leave your comment and make sure to smash the subscribe button.